The usage of meta-narratives or metafiction within games has become increasingly prevalent within contemporary games, and games with meta-narratives such as One Shot or Undertale have become some of my favorite games ever. This concept is likely very familiar to you if you've watched any of my prior videos, but to briefly summarize it, meta-narratives in games are often works that are self-referential in nature, as they are typically self-aware of the storytelling and tropes of their genre, along with them usually being aware of their own artificial nature as just being a game. Now then, the main reason I'm talking about this is because of a game that was released recently that has entranced me with its design, and that game is the Dark Queen of Mortholme. The Dark Queen of Mortholme is an anti-game by Mosu, with its premise being that you play as the Dark Queen who is challenged by the hero, and the hero is given the power to keep retrying the battle again and again. Now if that premise interests you, I would highly recommend that you play the game yourself before watching this video. It's only about 20 minutes long, and I can promise you that it's worth its short length. This is your one and only spoiler warning. For those of you who are little gremlins like me and watch videos on games you know nothing about, here's an extremely brief summary of the game. You play as the Dark Queen, who has her castle breached by the hero coming to put an end to the Dark Queen's eternal reign. You are able to take down the hero with a single strike and crush them immediately, but as I said before, the hero keeps respawning and retrying. Throughout the game, they begin to grow stronger by getting better items and adapting to your attack pattern. The Dark Queen is extremely powerful, especially in her true form, but eventually, the hero gains the strength needed to slay her, and ends her eternal reign. At this point, I hope to take a step back from the game itself to expand on the concept of meta-narratives to explain why I love this game so much. Meta-narratives, much like any other narrative, come in numerous different forms. For the sake of this video, I'll be using James Cox's The 4 Types of Metafiction in Video Games in order to define the major and distinct forms of meta-narratives. In this article, James defines 4 major types of meta-narrative, but the 3 types of meta-narrative I'm concerned with in this video are emergent metafiction, immersive metafiction, and internal metafiction. Emergent metafiction are meta-narratives that directly acknowledge their existence as fiction to the player. This is where a lot of meta-narrative games lie, as they are often about fake games within games. Immersive metafiction is when the meta-narrative incorporates the player themselves into the world, usually given some form of role within the universe. The example the game article provides is not too dissimilar to One Shot, which is a game where you're given the role of God that is distinct from the protagonist, as you must guide them along their journey. Internal metafiction is the type of meta-narrative that is typically far more subtle than the other types I've mentioned thus far, as it doesn't involve breaking the fourth wall or even acknowledging the player's existence. Still, this meta-narrative usually works in a self-contained way by exploiting the conventional storytelling or tropes of games. These types of meta-narratives are not mutually exclusive, where if a game is one type of meta-narrative, it cannot be another. James himself states in this article that, quote, the 4 types of video game metafiction aren't cast in stone, but are more of a slide or bar. Something I brought up before in a prior video was that most meta-narratives in games tend to break your own belief within the worlds they present, and will instead acknowledge and embrace their identities as just being games. With the context of this video, however, we can say more formally that these types of meta-narratives are emergent metafiction. And to connect this all back to the Dark Queen of Mortholme, what I admire most about the game is how it's not at all emergent metafiction. The game doesn't even hint at the possibility of a player being diegetic to the world, and the game remains strictly a work of internal metafiction. The game keeps its characters feeling real while still exploring these meta elements. Now, as I said at the start of this video, the Dark Queen of Mortholme describes itself as an anti-game, and this reveals itself through the game's premise. One of the taglines for the game itself is that it's the final boss's side of the story. And through this perspective, the game deconstructs what a relationship between a typical protagonist and a final boss may look like when presented more diegetically. And in doing so, the game uses this unconventional relationship to highlight its thematic messaging regarding change and improvement. The hero serves the role of the true protagonist of this story, as the hero would be the player character in any other game. The hero mimics the mindset most players have towards difficult challenges in games, with them often noting what attack patterns the boss has and trying to learn them in order to win against the boss. The hero does not aspire just for victory though, because like how most players want satisfying challenges in the games they play, The hero wants to genuinely duel the queen in order to improve themselves, and we see that mindset especially reflected in the alternate ending of the game where you decide to do nothing, where the hero encourages you to fight back to give an honorable duel. The hero even gets some moments that can be quite relatable to players, like how they'll sometimes go back through earlier parts of the game to get a better weapon against the final boss. Or in one of the game's funniest moments, the hero fights for a single run way worse than they should, and you find out in the next attempt that they apparently got distracted. The game is very careful about this, however, because it refuses to fall into the trap of explaining the hero's abilities or behaviors through the world itself just being artificial or some form of fake game. The prime example of this is the hero's fabled ability to respawn and try again, because this ability of the hero remains deliberately unexplained within the narrative itself, and it's more or less an accepted fact of the story that the hero can do this. On the other hand, the queen plays the opposing role to the hero, being the final boss for the hero and our playable character. The queen is brilliant for this role though, because her character gives diegetic explanations to a lot of the typical behaviors that you would see of a boss in a video game. For example, bosses in games will typically stay in the same location in the game's world until you return to them, and this is typically just a necessity of game design due to how difficult it would be to have a boss's location constantly shift. This is something that the Queen's character actually provides an in-universe explanation for, as we learn that she has remained exclusively in her throne room due to her believing that those areas are meaningless to her because she is already above it all. Additionally, her character also diegetically explains why almost every boss doesn't just alter their attack patterns on subsequent fights, as the queen believes that changing her attacks against the hero would be stooping to the hero's level. Other staples for bosses exist as well, of course, such as how many bosses in games have multiple phases or forms, and the queen's character explains why she doesn't just use this form immediately, as she believes the form deep down to be hideous and suffocating to use. Just like the hero, much of her character exists to explain the general nature of most final bosses, which allows the player's suspension of disbelief to stay present, while the game can still relate the player to itself far more than it otherwise would be able to through the usage of these meta-narrative elements. What really makes this game's approach to its meta-narrative so genius, however, is how it uses all of the meta elements I've established so far in order to enhance its narrative. The Dark Queen of Mortholme is a game largely about the capacity to change, as some of the game's description itself for the trailer states. The game uses the relationship between a typical protagonist and a final boss in order to explore these ideas. The hero represents change, which is supported by the game's meta-narrative because they are constantly improving and adapting to the queen's attack patterns for being able to respawn and repeat the fight. The queen represents stagnation, or lack of change, which her status as a final boss who will always remain in the same area and repeat the same attacks adds to. The game does not just present these two characters as constants that always embody these ideals, however, and the core of this narrative is how the queen grows more attached to the hero throughout the game. The queen's evolving relationship to the hero is shown visually for how she disposes of their corpse differently throughout the game. In the beginning, she uses the mere snap of her fingers to burn their corpse, but this later evolves into leading down to personally dispose of the body, and near the end, she ends up cradling the hero's body when burning it. In general, the queen's unyielding belief that she never needs to change herself is portrayed as a negative thing by the narrative. This can be observed for just how sad her life seems to be, as she knows nothing of any other place except for her throne room that we play the game in. She seems to be genuinely curious about some of these things as well, but refuses to be honest about it to the hero due to her belief in being inherently superior. The ending in which she manages to truly beat the hero showcases the worst outcome from a narrative standpoint. To even achieve this ending, the player must continually beat the hero by spamming the same spell over and over again, which already emphasizes how this ending is largely about this game's beliefs on stagnation. The result of consistently beating the hero like this, however, is even the hero's unwavering belief in improvement being shaken. And for the first time since the start of the game, the queen returns to sit on her throne for what can be presumed to be eternity. The throne here is used as symbolism for the queen's stagnation, as this is the only spot she was at until the hero introduced themselves to her. And the only time that she's sitting on her throne is when that force of change in her life isn't present. This outcome is a clear bad ending though, and not just for the fact that the Dark Queen's evil eternal reign will remain, but more importantly, she is committed to a life of complete stagnation and perpetual stasis, in which she'll never experience any of the world's wonders because she has shut herself from the one person that was letting her experience them. In the standard route of the game, the Queen is defeated by the hero. By the end, depending on your choices, the Queen can believe that her defeat was inevitable when faced with the hero's dark improvement and adaptation to her fight. This belief was never true though, because at certain points in the game, the hero offers her the chance to have a change of heart, to not rule this eternal reign of terror. However, the Queen for most of the game was completely in denial about there being any chance of her stooping to the level of others who she perceived as beneath her. The Queen was never destined to be slain at that moment, but that was the fate she resigned herself to, believing that was what the hero meant. I think the final exchange between the hero and the Queen really sells that point. Yes, you were right. All that exists is meant to end.
No, to move on.
As you do so, I expect you to make me proud. My defeat marks you with my approval.
I will. Rest easy now. Your approval will linger on in me.
In this ending, the game ultimately conveys the message that whether you accept change or not, it will come to you. Your only options when confronted by that change is to either accept it or to stubbornly hold on to what you have, but the game implores its characters to do the former. As the hero states, if you choose to defiantly answer no when the Queen is defeated to the hero, the only place the Queen can truly remain as she is now is in memory. The game is able to so poignantly communicate these themes through how the meta-narrative facilitates them. For deconstructing a relationship between a naturally evolving player character and the unchanging nature of bosses, the game is able to use this in order to explore its own beliefs on the capacity of change and improvement in a unique and compelling way. With all that said, that's all for this video. The Dark Queen of Mortholme is genuinely a fantastic game, and it's a work that I immediately fell in love with when I was introduced to it. As someone who loves meta-narratives like Undertale, which don't break your own immersion of the world for the sake of their own meta-messages, this game really appealed to me and I really felt I had to discuss it. If anything, I hope I was able to spread some much-needed love to this game, especially since its following is pretty small right now. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider liking and subscribing to help boost my content in the YouTube algorithm, and if you want to see similar analysis on games like this, I would highly recommend watching this video about how games can tell stories using their game design, as this video explores very similar ideas to this current video. If you have your own interpretations of this game that this video didn't include, or just comments from me in general, then feel free to comment them on this video. But other than that, take care.